I spent a lot of time on the so-called beauty contest analogy, which I think is very instructive. And that's the idea that investors, instead of investing on ultimate value, basically try and outguess each other. In 1930s in England, there were beauty contests in use. It was a bit sexist, this story, but I'm afraid that's how it was in the 30s. They'd have a page given over to pretty girls, and the readers had to write in, and you won a prize if you picked the prettiest. Except it's not quite that simple, because you win a prize if you pick the prettiest girl that everybody, the one who comes top of the opinion poll. So what are you trying to do when you try to win a contest like that? You're not trying to say who the prettiest is. You're trying to figure out who the girl who the average opinion will think the prettiest. Keynes figured that out, and then he said, well, actually, if you get clever, then there's a second degree. You don't think about the average opinion, what the average opinion thinks the prettiest girl will be. You've got to think about what the average opinion thinks the average opinion thinks the prettiest girl is going to be. And there are third, fourth, and fifth derivations, as he said. And actually, a lot of what happens in financial markets is this sort of approach. If you work on a hedge fund, most of the hedge funds, they've got momentum funds, they've got value funds, but even the value funds tend to be driven by how they think the analysts are going to react to various statistics. It's very much trying to outguess everybody else. So I take you back to Keynes, and then it's not just about financial markets. I mean, the idea of market failure is much broader than just finance. I've got a chapter about spillovers, externalities, global warming, taking you back to Pigou, the other famous British economist, not as famous as he should be, of the early 20th century, which I actually wrote up in the Wall Street Journal a couple of days ago. And Pigou's idea, which again is now a mainstream idea, there's a Pigou Club for Republicans, which Greg Mankiw at Harvard set up. His great contribution was this idea of spillovers or externalities, that the market is very good at measuring private benefits and private costs, but very poor at measuring social costs and social benefits. For example, the classic example, well, I'll give you Pigou's example, is a train, a new rail service, which sets up, say, between New York and Boston. That clearly provides a lot of value for the customers. They can go faster. That's all good. The prices reflect what people are willing to pay. But what about if he was riding in the steam age? There were lots of sparks emitted from these engines and just pieces of fire coming out of the engine. What about if it sets the surrounding woods ablaze? Who pays for that? Well, it's the owner of the field. The market mechanism doesn't give the railway company any incentive to pay that. Now, if you think about global warming for a second, it's exactly analogous. The people who produce the greenhouse gases, the power stations or the SUV drivers or anybody else who burns a lot of carbon fuel, they don't take into account the costs they're creating for, in this case, future generations, usually, or maybe some people who are young, maybe global warming will be so serious by 2050. But whatever, they don't take into account the ultimate social consequences of their actions. And what Pigou said is, to make them take account of it, we need a tax system, what he called extraordinary restraints. So that's the sort of underlying basis of the argument for carbon taxes, which is not a controversial idea in economics anymore. As I say, even Republican economists agree with that, or quite a few of them do. It's just incredibly politically unpopular, so nobody wants to put it forward. So that's another example of market failure.